All right, good morning. I hope everybody had an enjoyable fall break. Did anybody go anywhere? I got to go to the University of Wisconsin, Eau Claire, beautiful Eau Claire, Wisconsin, over the fall break to take our competitive sales team. One of our students placed fourth in that competition, and so she did really, really well. It's an opportunity. All of our students had good opportunities to go to the job and career fair and get contacts. So again, if you are thinking ahead about what you want to do, if you consider a career in sales, we have 100% placement, and the university pays for you to go to these types of competitions and perform and compete, and it's an opportunity not just to win prizes, but also, and to travel on the university's time, but also to get really good contacts in terms of going to the career fairs that people that are highly motivated to recruit you. We also have a dedicated career forum in the spring sales forum, career fair forum, and we have a bunch of companies that come to that, and so it's another opportunity. So I point these things out as we go along, and to give a shameless, since I'm a marketer, a shameless self-promotion to my own department and our own programs in the department. Today we need to talk about the product of the 4 Ps, the product part of the marketing mix, and specifically new product development. Some scholars argue that in order to remain competitive, big businesses particularly need to be constantly developing new products, and probably 25 or more at a time. Some will even say they need to be working on 25 new ideas a month. I think that's if you're looking at really large corporations, though, like 3M or Ford, things like that, they probably need to be developing more. Obviously, if you're a small business and an entrepreneur, maybe the number is less, but if you average it out, I think that's probably a good number. But we realize that when we talk about the need for new product development, that we sort of average it across the big business all the way to that mom and pop store that are probably, if you've got a convenience store, you're not really thinking about developing new products. You may be looking at new products to bring customers in, but not actually developing them yourselves. And the reason for this is because just like an overwhelming number of companies will fail, an overwhelming number of products will fail. Even products that are brought to market by big companies will fail. And if you think about this, think about drug companies, for example. How many of those drugs that they're working on will actually be able to be brought to market? Well, it's pretty risky if you're relying on the FDA to go through that process. You can see that they're going to work on a lot of things that may not pan out, and so you always have to have something in the pipeline. We can classify products in a number of ways. There's 2 big broad classifications of products, and those are sort of the umbrella classifications. There are goods, which are tangible items, and there are services. Now, when we get to services, I'll make an argument that maybe all goods are services. At least that's what Mary Jo Bittner says. But goods are things that we can touch, taste, feel, smell, that we can use our 5 senses to evaluate. And then there are services, which are the intangible, all of the activities that go into certain things, the intellectual property and the benefits associated with certain types of companies. Again, in the United States, the vast majority of companies are becoming, and the real value in our economy is becoming in services, and in unique services, and in those really thought-intensive services. Consumer products, we can further classify those in a number of ways. So when we talk about products, the product part of the marketing mix of the 4 Ps, we're also talking about services, and so we think broadly, and we'll talk about insurance products as being services, but consumer products, we can divide those into convenience products, things that you buy all the time, that you don't think a whole lot about. And the way you market each of these and the way you develop each of these is going to be different based on the classification of the product category itself. So convenience products are things like what? That Powerade that you're drinking. Do you think a lot about that? You're purchasing, you just went to the vending machine and you just got out of the student lounge as I was walking in. Is that where you got it? You find them everywhere. Consumer packaged products. shopping products, you don't think a lot about them, a lot about convenience products, and so how do we get those in front of the consumer's mind? Shopping products are ones that we actually do think a little bit more about, that we might take time and evaluation and go through that whole consumer behavior rational actor model that we talked about when we talked about consumer behavior. Then specialty products, things that you have specialized, custom made, that's becoming more and more prevalent as we have the ability to engage in value co-creation and mass customization. So anymore, one of the things that I have watched Mathis Brothers start advertising more heavily is custom ordered furniture. So you don't just have to go down. For most people, unless you were very wealthy, until very recently, you would go to Mathis Brothers or your local furniture store, wherever that might be, and they would have a selection of stuff and you would choose from that selection. Now, you can go into Mathis Brothers and you can custom order the couch with the kind of leather that you want. So if you don't want just, cowhide, you can order it in a variety of other kinds of materials, fabrics. If you want different colors, things like that. And mass customization is becoming increasingly important. And then there are unsought products. These are the ones, and the way we market these becomes important. These are the ones that we don't think about until we need it. Anybody have their favorite wrecker service on speed dial? You do? You actually know your wrecker service?
Yeah.
Really? You break down a lot?
You what?
You break down a lot?
That's friends do.
Oh, okay, so that's the reason. Most of us don't have any idea who the wrecker service is. We call AAA or some other aggregating service that will put us in contact with them. So things like wrecker services, funeral, although people do plan their funerals, it's kind of creepy that they do that. But for the most part, we don't think about those until we actually need them. In the terms of business products, we can organize business products and classify them, again, in a number of ways. Components, these are the parts that become part of the final product. For example, paint for the car. Ford buys lots and lots of paint, and they paint lots of cars. Steering wheels, transmissions, things like that. Support products are used in the production of other goods, so the dies that Ford uses to stamp metal are support products. And the way they purchase those is going to be highly specified and technical. Installation, buildings and equipment, and then accessories, tools, office equipment that we can buy in running our business, supplies, and then industrial services. And again, this is the big area in our economy now. The big growing sector of our economy is in industrial services, legal, accounting, auditing, financial services. Coming up with new products in those areas. You should know for the exam the difference between a product item. That's a specific stock keeping unit or SKU versus the product line. Those are closely related. So for example, Microsoft Word has Word, Excel, Publisher, and they group those together and they now call that what?
Office.
Microsoft Office Suite. And then Microsoft also has other products. The product mix is the entire thing. So what does Microsoft have? Well, they have business products, they have analytics products, they have Windows, and so all of those together are the product mix that an organization offers. When we talk about newness of a product, we can look at this from various perspectives. And one of the things that we need to think about when we look at this is what's the legal definition of newness? What do you think the legal definition is? Yep, that's what your textbook says, within 6 months of regular release. Now what does that mean? Within 6 months of the regular release. Well, we'll talk about what release means. Whether or not we're going to try a limited release, a beta test, things like that. We can also look at newness relative to the existing product line. So when Apple came out with their iPhone, that really was new. But is the 7 all that different from the 6?
Not really.
I have a 7. I had a 6 before. Can't really tell the difference. And in fact, I remember there was a comedian that when, I think it was the iPhone 5 came out, went out on the street with an iPhone 4 and was stopping people on the street to see what their reaction was to the new iPhone. And they're like, oh yeah, this is way cooler. I can tell the screen is much bigger. Was it really all that new?
Nope.
Is the iPhone 8 all that different from the iPhone 7? No? What are the new features that they've got on the iPhone? It's what? Longer battery.
I know they have like little picture taking stuff, like portraits.
Uh-huh.
They just added an app so they could call it new.
They added an app so they could call it new. What is one of the big things I think that the 8 has that the 7 doesn't? So what's one of the biggest problems with these devices historically?
They break.
They break. And how many of you have dropped them into water? Almost everybody. How many of you will admit to having dropped them in a toilet? I've done that. What is so one of the things that is a problem with making these water resistant, at least to a certain depth, is what?
No aux. Yeah.
Huh?
No aux port.
It's this part
Charging.
right here. It allows the water to get in right where you charge it. So what does the iPhone 8 have that may make it really new and revolutionary?
Wireless charging.
It's wireless. So yeah, one of the ways that you improve the water resistant characteristics of this device is to not have any holes in the case, so that the component parts are protected. Is that really new?
No.
Yeah.
I think from an Apple standpoint,
That's
the ability to just set it on the thing from the standpoint of that company, I think that is a fairly new feature.
But they're basically copying another company.
Well, it's new for Apple.
It's new for Apple.
New for the world.
New.
Yeah, it's new for Apple. I'm not sure. I mean, what were the first items to start using this sort of cordless charging technology? Electronic toothbrushes. Because toothbrushes are what? Again, if you have places that you have to plug them in, it can work against the integrity of it being water resistant, and toothbrushes naturally have to have what?
Water resistance.
Yeah, you have to have water. So they were some of the first to use that. Is that really new for the Apple? I think it is fairly new for Apple. What's another feature? The iPhone 10, what's the big feature with that?
Facial recognition.
Facial recognition. Is that really a leap?
No.
Using it in a new way.
I mean, I think it is. You know what?
For Apple it is.
Yeah. but not
Because
for
we have
Android.
facial recognition software, we just never use it for a phone. So for Apple, yeah, it's definitely.
Are there any other phones that have facial recognition? The Android
Yep.
that has facial recognition? So you sign on with with your webcam. I think that is pretty new for Apple. So revolutionary versus modification. In 1994, the first one of these types of devices, what could be called a smartphone, was released. That's hard to believe, back all that time ago. And if you looked at it, it really wasn't, compared to today's smartphone technology, it really wasn't all that smart. Couldn't do a whole lot. It was basically kind of like an organizer, a personal data assistant, and a phone combined. iPhone really was revolutionary in terms of a lot of the things that they did. Now, not all of it has been overwhelmingly successful, in my opinion, at least from a business standpoint, but they have managed to dominate the market. So from the customer's perspective, one thing that we can look at with regard to the newness of a product is how much learning is going to be required by the customer. There's probably not going to be a whole lot of learning required if you had an iPhone 7 to the iPhone 8. Is there? But from the Simon 1994 personal computer to this device, there was probably, if you just went from one to the next in that leap, there would be quite a bit of learning that would be required from the perspective of the consumer. Continuous innovation are changes in features that require very little or no new learning. So for example, again, if we went back in time to when I was growing up, there were basically like 3 varieties of laundry detergent out there. There was sort of Tide and Gain, and I can't remember what the other one was. They came in powder form. All laundry detergent was a powder that you threw in with your clothes. Now, what do you have? Well, you have the ability to have liquid, powder, various scents in terms of the fragrance that you can get, or because we've recognized that more and more people have allergic sensitivities, particularly to perfumes and dyes. So what can you get now?
Hypoallergenic.
You can get hypoallergenic, which is dye and perfume free. Anybody tried? All makes a dye and perfume free laundry detergent. Anybody tried it? You like it? It gets your clothes clean, but they don't smell.
That's about it.
You don't smell anything with them. So is that really required? Probably not. Like, did the laundry packs require any new learning on the part of the consumer? Not really. We can look at dynamically continuous innovation, minor changes that require some amount of learning. So what would be require some amount of new learning? Well, the new apps that they come out with, in terms of particularly on the camera feature and what you can do with the camera and the kinds of enhancements you can do might require, for you all, 5 minutes. But if you're 65, again, when we look at this, is it going to be a radical change? Maybe for somebody who's older. And then discontinuous innovation, high levels of learning are required. And so the example I use here are police body cameras. They have really had to start learning how to use these devices because they are not necessarily intuitive. Dashboard cams on police vehicles. What's one of the things that's led to things that police have had to get used to in terms of this? Well, in the world of DUI, something that I have practiced in the past and that I'm sort of interested in because I've had clients that I've had to represent in DUI cases. One of the things that the police had to do is they had to figure out how to testify and when they're using these cameras, because there's a presumption that at .08 you are inebriated, but you can bust the presumption. And so a lot of juries were looking at dashboard cams or body cams from a police officer's contact with somebody who flew over the .08 level and saying, yeah, that guy doesn't look drunk to me. So they had to learn, like maybe during DUI stops, if you want it to go well for you, you do what?
Turn off the
camera.
Might get in trouble for that.
Now, should they be able to do that?
Nope.
I don't think they should as a lawyer, but I'm a defense lawyer, so. But that's something that they've had to, it required radically new learning on the part of police officers with regard to this kind of stuff. So legal says up to 6 months of regular distribution. We can also look at learning or newness from the organizational perspective, and there are sort of 3 levels of looking at this from the organizational perspective. An extension, which is low risk and is usually the biggest risk there is cannibalization, although there are companies that deliberately use cannibalization as a strategy. What's one of the biggest companies that uses cannibalization as a strategy? Apple. Yeah, we're gonna release something every how often, at least historically with regard to the iPhone.
A year.
It used to be every 2 years. Now it's becoming much quicker in terms of the release. And the idea that they're trying to get there is that what? People want the newest and best product. I'm not so sure that that strategy is going to continue to work, because there's not that much difference between this and an 8. And am I willing to really go and invest the money after I've just bought this device in an entirely new device for something that's not really all that radical of a transformation? By the way, the auto industry, what Apple is doing, the auto industry in the United States did this as well. And it was one of the things that may have led to a significant decrease in their market share over time. Forever and ever and ever, when I was growing up, Mercedes-Benz, you couldn't tell a big difference unless you were a really big car enthusiast. You could not tell a difference between one model of Mercedes and maybe 5 or 6 years later. They all still looked pretty much the same. Because the idea was that people bought them and they were pretty reliable cars. Whereas the American automobile manufacturers had a tendency to go through sort of radical changes every 2 years to try and encourage people to buy this stuff. But people got tired of that, because automobiles are not something that you can change out like your socks. They're a big investment, and most people can't afford to go in and buy, and so they got really tired of the radical changes in the models. The other thing that happened with American car companies doing that was that the quality control, one of the reasons that Mercedes was so reliable when I was a kid, and believe me, I've had a Mercedes. I actually, the rabbi, I'm Jewish, and so the rabbi told me that Jews should not drive Mercedes, or should not drive German products. And, that was sort of a big thing years ago. I think most temples and synagogues have gotten over that. But I started referring to that car as Hitler's Revenge, because it was not nearly as wonderful a product as it should have been. But one of the things that did, I think, during the 1980s and early 1990s, lead to the German superiority in their auto manufacturing was the fact that they weren't changing. If you radically design a car, if you radically change the way it is designed, what happens? Your quality control can become real loosey-goosey because you didn't have enough time to work out all of the problems that were associated with that kind of configuration in the car. And Mercedes really had done that, and the American car companies, as a result, had a significant problem, in my opinion, in terms of quality control. Then you can have significant innovation. What would be a significant innovation? One of the things that's become maybe a significant innovation with regard to the auxiliary products, and one of the problems that you have is that if you have this device now, what did they have to do to the headphones so that you could use this? Because with this device, they got rid of the headphone jack, so what do you have to have? You have to have Bluetooth, or they had to give you a thing that modified your headphones so that it would fit into the micro, or whatever this is. This is not a USB, but it's the Apple jack, right? So that was a radically new, significant innovation when they came up with the wireless Bluetooth headsets, maybe. And then brand extensions. So going from your technology company, Google has started out as what kind of technology company? A what? They were a search engine. They've extended into now actually having products. So it's a technology product. It's the Google Pixel phone. What's one of the risks that you have with going into extensions into things that you're not necessarily or within your core competency? You can either have huge rewards, but there's also huge risks. It's sort of, one of the things that I told you at the beginning of the semester, again, all of this stuff sort of relates, is that the closest thing to a free lunch in finance that you will get, for those of you who've had your finance classes, is that diversification of your investment portfolio is a priori a good thing. Why is that? Why is diversification a good thing in terms of your portfolio? Yeah, it minimizes what kind of risk specifically? This will get you bonus points if you know the answer to this.
Volatility.
No? Well, but what type of volatility?
Market.
More specific.
Price volatility.
Not price. minimizes microeconomic risk, not macroeconomic risk. If the entire economy goes bad and tanks, it's going to affect your stocks probably. Although there are businesses that do better when the economy tanks. What kind of businesses do better, would you guess?
Bars.
Bars do a lot better, and particularly if you're invested in liquor stocks, they generally go up during times of economic depression. Why? People drink they self-medicate their sorrow. Also, if you have stock in companies that manufacture depression drugs, they do well during economic downturns because everybody goes and gets on Paxil or Zoloft or whatever the current is. But with regard to businesses, it's not as clear that you should diversify your portfolio because it may not be within your core competency. And so diversification analysis is less of a sure thing. And I'm not sure that Google going into, you can understand why they would want to go into that market, because it's a big market, but it involves what? It involves going from a complete service intangible company, really an idea, to manufacturing products. That requires some core knowledge of how these are manufactured, distribution, logistics, and things like that, and it's not necessarily always a good thing. Even though it's within the same sort of sector of the economy, I don't know if it's going to work out. What's Google Pixel done so far in terms of their market share? Anybody know? They have not been radically successful to this point at penetrating the market. Now, will that always be the case? I don't know. If you went back in time to the first cell phones that were really mass-produced for a larger commercial market, that company has largely lost the market share. What was one of the first companies to really mass-produce?
Motorola.
Motorola. Does Motorola manufacture a whole lot of phones?
They even manufacture phones?
They do. They do. And if you have a grandparent who's over 65, they may have a Motorola product. Still manufacture some of those small flip phones, the Go phones, things like that. So, new product success or failure. Lots of new products will fail, even if you do everything right. And my example here is New Coke. So there was a lot written about this. Pepsi came up with, because Pepsi and Coke have dominated carbonated, caffeinated, caramelized beverage industry forever. There was this big rivalry. And so in order to try and get an advantage on Coke, which is the all-American product as opposed to Pepsi, which is the inferior communist product that you should avoid at all costs, Pepsi actually did this thing that was pretty innovative in terms of marketing called the Pepsi Challenge. You all are too young to remember this, where they did blind taste tests in places like malls and state fairs, and they challenged people to try Pepsi, and they said if you try it, blind taste testing, more people preferred Pepsi to Coke. And that was true, but there was a lot written. There was some allegation that Pepsi served Coke warm and Pepsi cold, which affected the outcome of the results. But the other thing that probably affected the outcome of the results is, from a taste perspective, what differentiates Coke from Pepsi? Pepsi is sweeter than Coke. That's right. Pepsi is sweeter than Coke. That's the big differentiating. And most people like that. What was the challenge? They gave you a 1 ounce sip of Coke versus Pepsi, and more people like it for 1 ounce. You like it because you like the sweetness initially, but it's overwhelming. It's too much. And so the vast majority of people, if you give them an entire drink, they would prefer to drink Coke, which is less sweet than Pepsi. But with this, Pepsi does this challenge, and Coke realizes that, hey, maybe we need to reinvent ourselves. And they did everything that you can think of in terms of that we would talk about in terms of launching a new product, and it failed miserably. Why? Because it was too sweet, and people rebelled. They wanted what they remember. Coca-Cola had a long history. If you have watched Coca-Cola, and particularly like when I was growing up, people had a lot of really strong sentimental attachments to Coca-Cola, primarily from their holiday sort of season campaigns that they did. How many of you remember the polar bears, the Coca-Cola bears and stuff? And when I was a kid growing up, there's a famous ad now called "I'd Like to Teach the World to Sing," which shows people on a mountainside and the big looking crisp. People had this really fond memory of Coke, and they screwed with it, and it was a big failure. So what can minimize the risk? So even big companies like Coca-Cola can experience failure. Well, you have to go through the protocol. You need a well-defined target market. You have to specify customer needs, wants, and preferences. Why is it that maybe Google Pixel is not going to compete with the iPhone and some of the other manufacturers of Droids? Well, are they really satisfying a need or want that's different in the market? Do they know what customers really want? And then how will your product satisfy those needs and wants? So, reasons that you might fail. An insignificant point of difference. And I put a question mark on this. I have iPhone 7, well they've released the iPhone 8. Is there going to be that much of a difference that are going to get people to switch iPhones? Not having economic access to buyers. You may have a great product, but it's really, really difficult to get into a market. And an example of this are consumer packaged goods. Grocery stores usually, and one of the things that they did at this competition was they sold Hormel. This is the only competition that we go to that they sell a tangible product. At most of the other competitions they sell, for example, for years at the National Collegiate Sales Competition in Kennesaw, Georgia, they sold Paycom, because Paycom was the major sponsor of the competition. And so they actually sell Hormel in this competition, and so it was really interesting. All of the food that we had for 3 days at the competition, they served all kinds of food constantly. It was all Hormel products. I've never been so sick, and I am definitely a meat eater, but I've never been so sick of highly processed meat products in all my life as I was by the time we got back on Sunday. I was really tired of looking at sausage patties and processed meat. So there's limited space. They want to know that they're going to have success, and so lots of retailers, particularly big retailers, charge slotting fees to get access. If you want your product to be at a prime position in the store where consumers are likely to buy it, you have to pay slotting fees, and those can be out of the reach of most small businesses. What are some small businesses that have had success with this here in Oklahoma? Probably the best barbecue sauce in the entire world, in my opinion, is manufactured right here in good old Oklahoma in Ponca City. Anybody? Head Country. I remember when Head Country got into Walmart. I was in my PhD program. They got into the Walmart nationwide, not just on a limited local area. And I like literally broke down crying. I was so happy that there was something from Oklahoma when I was getting my PhD in New Mexico. But to get into Walmart, it's really, really tough. The way Head Country did it was, at the time, you could actually get local Walmart managers had some control over being able to source local products. That's no longer the case. Another example of this is Maria Ray's, which is a line of salsa and chips that's manufactured out of Enid, Oklahoma. And it's started by a woman named Mary Boothman, and she's really kind of an interesting person to listen to, how she developed her new product lines. And it's all a story of how she didn't want to do any of this. She moved back from California with her husband, and they had really liked the Mexican food that they had in California. Every state, by the way, for those of you who sort of are Mexican food connoisseurs, has different flavors in terms of their Mexican food. I grew up between Oklahoma and Santa Fe, New Mexico, where my father lives, and Santa Fe, New Mexican is totally different than what we have here in Oklahoma. Arizona Mexican is different, and California Mexican is different from all of those. Primarily what we have in Oklahoma is more influenced by which state? Yeah, what I call Baja, Oklahoma, our southern neighbors. It's been influenced by Tex-Mex, and so there's a different flavor. They really didn't like Tex-Mex, they liked California Mexican. So her husband said, I think we ought to try and start a Mexican restaurant in Enid, Oklahoma. And I don't really want to start a restaurant. We don't know anything about the restaurant business. And they started it was an overwhelming success, and then people were asking if they could buy their salsa that they served in this restaurant. And so her husband said, I think we ought to start like manufacturing consumer packaged goods salsa. And she said, I don't really think I want to do that. But he talked her into it, and there's a company in Enid called Pierre Foods that actually helped them with understanding how you get stuff. And she actually literally drove around to Walmarts until she found a Walmart that would let her set up a booth and sell, and she got it into Walmart. You can no longer do that. The reason I tell you this story is because it is a great salsa, and it's a great success story, but if you wanted to do that today, your chances of getting into Walmart are just next to nothing. So you may have a great product, but not have access to the buyers. You might have an incomplete protocol, and here I use an example from Sonic. One of my colleagues that I do research with, her name is Dr. Kim Solik, and we do research in the field of new product development for food. And she worked for Sonic before she got her PhD, and so she still has a contract with Sonic. And she would go in after they'd done field tests and present her findings to the board or to the VPs of product development at Sonic, and Cliff Hudson, who's the CEO, would say, you know what I think? I think we ought to have vanilla cherry diet slush. And Kim would say, we didn't test that. Yeah, but I like vanilla cherry diet. I can't remember what it was. I think it was margarita slush. And she's like, we haven't tested that. Yeah, but I like it. So that's what we're going to do. Well, Cliff Hudson is a 58, 59-year-old white male. What's Sonic's demographic? Who goes to Sonic? It's women, soccer moms, and teenagers. That's who buys Sonic. I don't get it, because I hate Sonic. But that's who buys, and she's like, Cliff, you're not in our demographic. Yeah, but I like it. Well, the fact that you like it and project doesn't mean that everybody is going to like that. So you can, and they've had a lot of market failures as a result. He's also the one that is just convinced that the two guys, how many of you like the two guys in the commercials? I hate the two guys in the commercials. Like I literally, when they come on, want to stab myself so I can take my mind off the pain that they're causing me. They're just horrible. I don't know, and they're not at all indicative of Sonic's demographic. I think they're not really, great spokesmen for the company. Lack of satisfaction of critical factors. Bad timing. You release a product and the economy tanks and it's not a liquor product. You release a new high-end laptop. What are the chances of success if the economy's in a tailspin? Not good. Poor quality. I give an example here of Microsoft Vista. Microsoft is famous for doing this. They're a completely product-driven company. They push really crappy products out on people and then attempt to fix it on the back end. Now they get away with it because they're the what? They're the biggest. There are basically, in computing software, there was a better software package out there. So the history of Microsoft is founded by Bill Gates, and actually he gets a government contract and he doesn't actually have a product. So he buys a product that was called QDOS, which stood for Quick and Dirty Operating System. And then they modified it. It really was not the best OS out there. There were better operating systems, even than Windows. It was called Linux. Anybody heard of Linux? Linux is not really around, except that there are some companies that still use Linux. Prisons still use Linux. So the company that I worked for, we actually manufactured our product to sit on Linux, to work on Linux platforms, because prisons still use Linux, and they don't have external web-based software. So we would manufacture it to be compatible with Linux platforms because they were still using it. Linux failed because nobody really knew who owned it. It was open source, and so nobody knew who owned Linux, as I understand it, and so that's the reason it failed. Microsoft, it was proprietary, which led to their success, but they continued to manufacture crappy software products, in my opinion, and foist them off on people, and one of the ones that was a big failure was Vista. I remember when they launched Vista, and it was supposed to be great, and everybody migrated instantly past Vista as fast as they could. Windows 8 was somewhat similar. Why was it not a big? Because it was manufactured for what? For being able to do this. And most desktops still don't have what? The ability to do this. Yeah. So they do that poor quality. Now you can get away with it if you're Microsoft. If you're not as big a company as Microsoft, you can't get away with it. Lack of market attractiveness. You may have people that are highly motivated to buy, but if there's just not enough of them to make it financially feasible, you may experience product failure. And then poor execution of the marketing mix, going through and not having an adequately defined market and all of these things. So what can you do for product success or to help ensure product success? By the way, until recently, Apple did none of these things and they were fairly successful because Steve Jobs was brilliant. But other than that, they've now had to rely on going through a more traditional process. So there are 7 steps, and there's a company called StageGate, which provides for formal evaluation of each stage to determine whether or not you should proceed to the next stage, whether or not you can correct and continue on, or as I put it, cut bait and run. Anybody fishermen? Fishermen? Yeah. Maybe don't know what cut bait might be. God, that's unusual. Usually most Oklahomans. When I use my hunting and fishing analogies, people usually get them. Anybody a hunter? So step 1, define the role that the product is going to fit in with your overall company objectives, and then perform a SWOT and environmental scan, your strengths, weaknesses, your opportunities and threats, along with a more detailed environmental scan of the potential market out there. Then you generate ideas. Where do you get your ideas from? What are your sources for idea generation? Well, a lot of it can come, if you're, for example, 3M, it can come from your research and development. What is 3M known for manufacturing? Adhesives, that's what they did. That's 3M's big thing is adhesives. And they had this guy who was working in the adhesives lab, and he had an adhesive that was not terribly adhesive. But it was adhesive enough that if you put it to another piece of paper, if you put one piece of paper to another, it would stick, but you could then do what? You could peel it off. So they invented Post-its. 3M will pay you a big bonus if you come up with a market, if you come up with a marketable product. You're allowed to spend a lot of your own time, a lot of your company time on personal projects that the company will then own, and Post-its is one of the best known examples of a success, of a product that probably was going to be a failure, but they noticed, they came up with an innovative way of using this non-adhesive adhesive, and it was a big success. And Post-its have gone on, in spite of the fact they were not developed by anybody seen, now I'm going to date myself again, Romeo and Michelle's high school reunion, where they claim to have been the ones that invented Post-its. No, they didn't. They've got all kinds of lines that have come out of the Post-its. So it used to be, again, Post-its were just these little yellow pads that you could stick to another piece of paper. Now what do we use, what kinds of stuff do we use Post-its with? Well, there are flags so that you can tab your textbook. They can mark places on contracts for people to sign, so they come up with lots of product extensions. Your sales force listening to customers is another really good source of product idea generation. And then your research and development labs. Obviously for cancer and things like that, drug companies have formalized processes for going through these kinds of steps to develop idea generation and testing. Then you're going to screen. Internally, consider your technical feasibilities, whether or not you can do this. When I was in the private sector at the American Education Corporation, I remember we had an RFP, and they wanted titles that we didn't have. And I was reviewing the RFP, and I went to our CEO, and I said, Jeff, we don't have these titles, and I'm not sure we can develop them on time to meet the RFP. And he looked at me, and that's sort of his whole management philosophy was summed up by, he used an expletive that starts with F. F, the numbers, live on the edge. We'll develop them by the time we get to selling the product. It's not necessarily the way you really want to do that, But we actually did manage to do it. We got the developers to actually develop the titles that we needed in time to meet that RFP. But you have to consider your technical capabilities. And then externally, you've got to test your ideas on consumers to see whether or not there really is a market. Develop your detailed financials in step 4, your business analysis, and whether or not you can get access to the market that you're going to need to plan for financial success. Then you develop, and some of these, not all products can go through all steps. So for example, your prototype, your lab testing and consumer testing, there are some things that you can't test. And the textbook gives you an example of how do you test if you're going to start a new museum. When they started the Science Museum of Oklahoma, did they have any idea that that would be successful? How do you test that? How do you test a science museum? Pretty hard to test, isn't it? Something like that that's that specific and unique. And so you might not be able to do a prototype or lab testing, and then consumer testing. And then market testing, exposing the product to prospective customers. There are different types of tests. If you're in software, we call these alpha and beta testing. Alpha testing usually is involved in internal or bringing customers into your lab to try the product out, and then beta is the limited release. So you can do standards with consumer packaged goods. A lot of times they do standard market testing. There are certain locations in the country that are fairly good demographic representations of the nation as a whole. One of those places is like in Ohio. One of the communities there is fairly representative of the nation as a whole, and so there's a whole lot of products that are actually tested there. Controlled test markets, where you have a contract with a company to test your markets or test your products. There are companies like Symphony or IRI that will do this. And then simulated marketing tests, where you try it in places like shopping malls. Anybody ever done any of the taste testing? There's a marketing company in Quail Springs that will send people out in the mall and they'll try to grab you and get you to actually test products for them. I remember testing ice cream there one time. Step 7 is bringing it to commercialization. Positioning your product in the market, and then regional versus a full-scale market launch. What are some examples of things that are launched regionally? Historically, movies a lot of times were launched on a regional basis if they weren't attracted to an entire nationwide audience, because they had more limited appeal, and so you release them into a limited market, and then it would eventually go to DVD. Any questions on products? All right, so I will, if you have any questions about the exam, I will have a few minutes that we can talk about that. Let me make some general remarks based on the last exam and sort of what I've seen in talking with you. The way to approach the exam. So this is an upper division course. If you were taking a lower division course, like say American National Government, what we're generally concerned with at that level is that you're able to identify sort of terms and match terms with their definition. Because you are business students and you're going to have to apply this stuff, you need to go beyond, even in a multiple choice exam, just being able to identify, knowing the terms. And so one of the things that as you study for the exam that you should think about is applying these things to your life and the experiences that you've had. If you can come up with your own examples of the terms in the chapter, that will go a long way towards your being able to identify the correct answers on the exam. The other way the exams are written that are different in 3,000 and 4,000 level courses than at 1,000 and 2,000 level is that all of the answers may be right. What we generally do in order to encourage critical thinking is, and so what students do is they read the question, and you should read the question, read the whole question. Don't start looking at the answers. Read the whole question. They come to the first answer and it's right, and they select that answer. So for example, if I said, which of the following is true about marketing? Marketing is a pervasive social activity. You see that answer, you've heard that in class, and that's correct, isn't it? B, marketing is the only fully integrated function of the firm. That's correct too, isn't it? Yep, only fully integrated, because you heard that in class too, right? Marketing involves working across not only internal departments, but external constituencies. That's correct too. The fourth answer. Marketing involves working with internal and external constituencies because marketing is the only fully integrated function of the firm and it is a pervasive social activity. That's the correct answer. Most people stop at one and they get it wrong. So read all the options and look for the most correct option. Do you all have any questions? All right, so the exam is Thursday, right, according to the schedule? Yes. I got that right? Hopefully I got that right. So yep, Scantron 882E if you don't have them. The department sells them for 50 cents. So I will see you guys on Thursday.